I have been a fan of both Final Fantasy games and handhelds for a long time. So, my go-to device has been the Vita for a while now. Because on this Vita, even though I don't have the first one installed, you can play the PSP versions of Final Fantasy 1 until 4. And you can play the PlayStation 1 versions of Final Fantasy 5 until 9. You get the HD remastered Final Fantasy 10 and 10-2. And you also have spin-offs like Crisis Core, the PSP game, and the Dissidia games, and World of Final Fantasy. This makes it a little all-round Final Fantasy machine, even if it's a bit dated, so you can play newer games on it, starting from Final Fantasy XII, for example. However, stupid cat, leave me alone. I lied, you're not stupid. Ever since I bought this big chunky boy here, I have a new device for all my Final Fantasy needs. So I figured I was gonna take it through the paces and see how many of the numbered Final Fantasy titles it can run. Hopefully all of them. Now before we get started, it might be a good idea to install Crankshaft on your Steam Deck. Crankshaft is a Steam client plugin manager that will allow you to install some pretty interesting plugins on your Steam Deck.
Alright, let's start at the beginning. The first Final Fantasy was released in 1987 for the Nintendo Entertainment System, or Famicom, in Japan. It was remade for several consoles over the years, like the PlayStation, PlayStation Portable, and the Nintendo 3DS. It was created by Hironobu Sakaguchi and developed and published by Square. The game, following the story of 4 youths called the Warriors of Light, who have to restore light to the world's 4 elemental crystals, was a great commercial success and is regarded as one of the most influential RPGs on the NES, and perhaps of all time.
This is of course the new Pixel release, and it should run pretty much out of the box actually. Let's have a look. That music, it's like coming home. I first played this one on the PSP. The story of this first game was pretty basic, I seem to remember. Let's just have a look. Let's see if we can... There we go. What happened? What did I miss? Why is Morgan dead? That's not a very good start. I don't even have Phoenix Downs yet. Anyway, yeah. It works perfectly out of the box. Let's move on to Final Fantasy II.
Final Fantasy II was released for the Famicom in 1988 in Japan, but didn't get an English release until the PlayStation version as part of a collection with the first game in 2002. It has seen several re-releases since. The game, centered on 4 youths whose parents were killed during an army invasion by the Empire of Palamecia, who are using Hellspawn to conquer the world, introduced many elements that would become a staple of future Final Fantasy games, including chocobos and the recurring character Cid.
There we go. Oof. Very dramatic. I actually need to replay this one. Moving on to the Pixel version of Final Fantasy III, of which I actually only ever played the 3D version.
Third Final Fantasy was released in Japan in 1990, also developed by Square for the Famicom. It was not released outside of Japan until the 3D remake for the Nintendo DS in 2006. It is the first game in the series to feature special battle commands based on a job system, such as steal or jump. The story revolves around 4 orphaned youths, drawn to the Crystal of Light. The crystal grants them some of its power and instructs them to go forth and restore balance to the world.
So this should work just as fine as 1 and 2. There we go. Let's spruced up the music a little bit, added a bit of a rock guitar sound. Right, works perfectly. Moving on, we have the 3D Remake, which is the version of 3 that I have played. I think I've played it pretty much until the end, but I don't think I've ever finished it actually. So I also should return to this. Take a look at the settings. Let's bump them up. And play. Of course, for most of these older Final Fantasy games, you can probably screw this back a whole lot. Let's go for 5, let's see. Skip this for a second. Let's just also frame rate limit. Starting to think I might even be able to just put this to the minimum. The soundtrack is missing out on that grungy guitar sound. So we can auto battle for a second, speed things up a bit. Yeah, works perfectly. Let's exit and move on.
Final Fantasy IV, released in 1991. It was once again developed by Square and was the first Final Fantasy to release on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. It released as Final Fantasy II in North America, since none of the other sequels had an English localization at the time. It was the first Final Fantasy game to feature the active battle system, and the first game in the series to give each character their own unchangeable character class. Just like Final Fantasy III, the game got a 3D remake for the Nintendo DS, which was released in 2007. The game is often regarded as one of the greatest video games of all time.
I think I played this one on the Game Boy Advance. Oh, what just happened? Alright, it should be playable, but it won't start. Right, I mentioned Crankshaft earlier. Crankshaft is the thing that gives me this button, or not specifically Crankshaft, but a plugin I installed with it. Then you can just tap here and it will go to the ProtonDB site and you can see what you need to do. So it says here, switch to older version 6.3-8. So let's do that. Let's go here, back. Alright, it is downloading Proton, the right version, 6.3-8. Oh, well that sucks. Alright, so I finally got Final Fantasy IV working by validating the game files, which of course is the first thing I should have tried. Hi kitty. Now loading. The kitty craves attention. Oh, there we go. So it was a bit of a hassle to get this one started, but in the end it also does work. So that's great. There's cat hair all over my Steam Deck. That can't be healthy. We have another version we can check of Final Fantasy IV, and that is the 3D Remake. I should have made some coffee for this. Oh, there we go. I'm not a masochist, I'm just going for normal. Very dramatic. I am not the biggest fan of these 3D remakes, I'm gonna be honest. But yeah, works perfectly. The battle screen is capped automatically by the game at 15 frames per second, so you can't get more out of that.
Everyone all right?
Alright, let's check out Final Fantasy IV, The After Years.
We can actually choose our hertz here. Just leave it. Oh, I want to. Here we go. Okay, play. Little achievement for starting the game. Yeah, I don't like this style. Tiny little legs. Anyway, works perfectly again. That's it.
And time to move on to Final Fantasy V. The game first released in Japan only on the Super Famicom or Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1992. It wasn't released in English until its inclusion in the Final Fantasy Anthology, released in North America in 1999 on the PlayStation. The game begins as a wanderer named Bartz investigates a fallen meteor and learns of the dangers facing the 4 crystals that controls the world's elements. Final Fantasy V marks the first time in the franchise where the player can see which playable character's turn is next in battle, in the form of the ATB bar, which fills according to the character's speed.
So beautifully dramatic. Oh, I really like the look of this game. Let's investigate the meteorite. Yeah, you wait, Boko. Oh no. Yeah. Alright, moving on.
Final Fantasy VI, also known as Final Fantasy III from its initial North American release, was released for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System in 1994. It marks the first Final Fantasy game not directed by the series creator Hironobu Sakaguchi. His role was taken over by Yoshinoro Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito. I hope I did not butcher those names too much. Set in a world with technology resembling the Second Industrial Revolution that has prominent steampunk influences, the game's story follows an expanding cast that includes 14 permanent playable characters. The narrative deals with the themes of a rebellion against an immoral military dictatorship, pursuit of a magical arms race, use of chemical weapons in warfare, depictions of violent and apocalyptic confrontations, several personal redemption arcs, teenage pregnancy, and the renewal of hope and life itself. It is widely considered to be one of the greatest video games of all time and is often cited as a watershed title for the role-playing genre.
I remember playing Final Fantasy VI on the Game Boy Advance. And again, really beautiful graphics, especially for its time, but I'm still a sucker for the look of these games. I think this one, yeah, starts with the mecha. Alright. Time for some combat. Oh, gonna make me kill a dog? What is this, The Last of Us Part 2? Oh, fire beam, yeah. Do that. Time to move on to the PlayStation 1 era with Final Fantasy VII.
Final Fantasy VII, the first Final Fantasy to use full motion video and 3D graphics, released for the PlayStation in 1997. It was the very first game in the series to receive a PAL release. The game's story follows Cloud Strife, a mercenary who joins the eco-terrorist organization Avalanche to stop the world-controlling megacorporation Shinra from using the planet's life essence as an energy source. The game was a huge commercial and critical success and is regarded as one of the greatest and most influential video games ever made.
This was the second Final Fantasy game I ever played. The first one still coming up being Final Fantasy X. And like for many people, because it was one of the first. It's also one of my favorites. Even though I might like the graphics of IX, for example, better from the PlayStation games, the story and characters of VII were really amazing. Let's just see. Now, when you have hit this screen, there's two things you can do. You need to hit the OK button, which is X. Not this one, it's the one on your keyboard. So you can connect like one of those Bluetooth keyboards or something. But way easier is to just go into your controller settings and set the X key as one of your back buttons. So we press that. There we go. This game truly has one of the most iconic opening scenes in any video game, if you ask me. Alright, first of all, let's see if we can put always run on. No. Really? No always run? Well, that sucks. Now we just keep holding B. Absolute classic for a good reason. And works fine out of the box. Now let's go for something that we can't play native.
Crisis Core is a prequel to the 1997 PlayStation game Final Fantasy VII. It was developed by Square Enix and released for the PlayStation Portable in 2007. The game primarily focuses on Zack Fair, a young member of the organization Soldier, who is assigned to look for the missing soldier Genesis. The game takes the player from the war between the megacorporations Shinra and the people of Wutai to the events of Nibelheim, ending just before the beginning of Final Fantasy VII. Crisis Core ditches the active time battle system of Final Fantasy VII for a more action-focused real-time combat system. Also, the soundtrack is absolutely fucking phenomenal.
For this we need to open PPSP. Remember guys, emulation is not illegal if you rip your own ROMs. Emulation on the Steam Deck is absolutely fucking fantastic. When the PSP came out, I bought it for Crisis Core. And I was completely addicted to that game. This game really has a phenomenal retread, I would say, of the opening scene of the original Final Fantasy VII.
Not too bad. Piece of cake. I'll make first in no time.
PSP games look absolutely great on the Steam Deck.
You got it.
Moving on with the Final Fantasy VII spin-offs. Time to check Dirge of Cerberus.
In Greek, this is said Cerberus. In English, however, this is said Cerberus. You do want to stress on the first syllable.
Dirge of
Cerberus.
a game set 3 years after the events of Final Fantasy VII, released in 2006 for the PlayStation 2. The game plays as a third-person shooter with some hack and slash and RPG elements, in which you take control of Vincent Valentine, one of the hidden characters of Final Fantasy VII. In the story, Vincent is targeted by Deepground, a mysterious organization that plans to awaken a creature known as Omega, with the ability to destroy the planet. Dirge of
Cerberus.
has received a mixed critical reaction, but I personally absolutely fucking loved it.
It's up on PC as X2. So Dirge of
Cerberus.
it's a bit of a special case. It's a bit like what if Final Fantasy and Devil May Cry had a child. You play as Vincent, one of the secret characters from Final Fantasy VII. I remember this game being quite fun. Had some pretty cool cutscenes. This is weird. Why does it run so slow? So it is playable, but slowed down a little bit. This is really bizarre. Theoretically playable, but it doesn't run as good as I hoped it would. It has a lot of slowdowns. So I don't think this way it would be fun to finish the game, to say the least.
3 hours later.
Alright, I did manage to get it working better and smoother. So let's go to properties. What I did was I switched the renderer to software instead of Vulkan. When you switch to software, it's not possible to render at 720p anymore. You have to render at PS2 resolution. I think that's 540p. I played a bit already, so I know it's running pretty good. It says here 50 frames per second. That's because it's the PAL version. And PAL TVs were 50 Hz. So that's normal. So yeah, it's not perfect. It does have some frame dips, but it does run a whole lot better than when we left it on Vulkan. And it is now definitely playable. You definitely could finish the game in this state. Just... oh yeah. On to the Final Fantasy VII Remake.
Final Fantasy VII Remake was announced in 2015 and released in 2020. It was developed and published by Square Enix. It is the first in a planned trilogy of games remaking the 1997 classic. An enhanced version, Final Fantasy VII Remake Integrade, including a side story where you can play as Yuffie, was released for the PlayStation 5 and Windows in 2021. The game was praised for the expanded story and the updated battle system for its strategic elements and visual flourishes.
Valve worked together pretty closely apparently with Square Enix to really make it work smooth on the Steam Deck. So we have this frame rate limited at 30, pretty standard settings. When we go to options, I do keep texture at high. I think it looks just really way better with higher textures. It's been a couple of weeks since I played, so as you can see, it keeps a pretty consistent 30 FPS.
Don't mind us, y'all. Just pass through. And there you have it.
The game is an absolute blast to play on the Steam Deck. It looks gorgeous. And just really works really fine straight out of the box. People seem to be mixed on the road the remake has taken, but I find it a great game myself. I really love it. It's great to see
We gotta breathe with this.
this world with these modern graphics.
Like it? What's up with that?
It's like in the tunnels. They get twisted by the Mako.
Next up for the games that were originally released on the PlayStation is Final Fantasy VIII.
Final Fantasy VIII, as the name suggests, the 8th main installment in the series, released for the PlayStation in 1999. Set on an unnamed fantasy world with science fiction elements, the game follows a group of young mercenaries led by Squall Leonhardt, as they are drawn into a conflict sparked by a sorceress who seized control of a powerful military state. The game builds on the visual changes brought to the series by Final Fantasy VII, including the use of 3D graphics and pre-rendered backgrounds, while also departing from many Final Fantasy traditions. It is the first Final Fantasy to use realistically proportioned characters consistently, feature a vocal piece as its theme music, and forego the use of magic points for spellcasting. Final Fantasy VIII was well received by critics and was a commercial success, grossing $151 million in its first day of release in Japan, and more than $50 million during its first 13 weeks in North America, making it the fastest-selling Final Fantasy title until Final Fantasy XIII.
According to Steam, it's not supported, but let's have a look anyway. Never started it up before, so this is the first run. Our cat Scallywag is joining us again. Can you get out of the way, please, Kitty? Thank you. Okay. Alright, loading. You want some love? You want some attention? The loading screen still seems to be at 10%, so I don't know. Let's see what ProtoDB says. Oh, it just says you need to use a community layout. So according to this, it actually should start up. Let's try again. Okay. Oh, there we go. Take a look at this one. This has the same thing where you have to press X. So let's add that. There we go. Even though I own this game on the PlayStation 1, I actually never finished it. I think I got like a quarter through or something. I could never really get used to the realistic style they tried to do on the PlayStation graphics. But I heard good things, and it's one of the games I should give another try. To me, the character models out of this game always look more like they belonged into the Resident Evil games or something. I kind of like the stylized versions of older Final Fantasy games. But seeing it now, I think I just needed to get used to it. It looks better than I remember. Right, but this seems to work fine. I just need to reset the controls. So let's take a look at the remastered version, which should work right out of the box. It looks fine. See if I can skip it now, maybe. Nope, we're gonna have to sit through it again. I think I'm gonna make myself a cup of coffee while I wait. Yeah, now that I look at it in the remastered version, the art style does hold up a whole lot better than I remember it. I really need to finish this game. You can see the backgrounds are still more low-res than the actual characters. So it seems like they didn't do any AI upscaling or something like that. Alright, game works perfectly, out of the box, nothing needed. I'm just gonna leave it installed and maybe go for a playthrough. So the final one of the PlayStation 1 generation is Final Fantasy IX.
Final Fantasy IX only released a year after Final Fantasy VIII in 2000, since the game was developed in parallel with its predecessor. Envisioned by developers as a retrospective for the series, it departed from the futuristic settings of Final Fantasy VI, VII, and VIII by returning to the medieval style of the earlier games. Consequently, it draws heavy influence from the original Final Fantasy and features allusions to the rest of the series. Final Fantasy IX was the last game in the main series whose music was composed solely by Nobuo Uematsu. Players follow a thief named Zidane Tribal who kidnaps Princess Garnet till Alexandros XVII as part of a ploy by the neighboring nation of Lindblum. He ends up joining Garnet and a growing cast of characters on a quest to take down her mother, Queen Bran of Alexandria, who started a war between nations in the medieval fantasy setting called Gaia. Final Fantasy IX released to critical acclaim and was a commercial success.
It is probably one of my favorites. It's a bit of a return to form towards the NES and SNES days of Final Fantasy. It goes back to a 4-player party, for example. Vivi's design is like the old black magic users in the old games. According to Steam, it's not compatible, Let's have a look what ProtonDB has to say. Checkboxes in the launcher don't show if they're checked or not, but they do work. Alright, let's see. I actually see the checkbox working now, so that might have been fixed. Standard resolution is pretty low though, so let's change that up. Let's just use the trackpad. If you hold this options button on the left side, trackpad will automatically change to mouse mode, by the way, which might be an interesting thing to know. I wonder if there's a way to change these bezels, or how you call them. I actually prefer to just have them black. Same thing here as with the VIII Remaster. The character models look really crisp, but the background didn't seem to have had any work. I mean, it doesn't bother me too much, but it is definitely noticeable. I absolutely adore this game. Anyway, works perfectly. Great game. Time to move into the PlayStation 2 era with both Final Fantasy X and X-2.
Final Fantasy X, the first Final Fantasy game on the PlayStation 2, was developed and published by Square and released in 2001. The game marks the Final Fantasy series' transition from entirely pre-rendered backdrops to fully three-dimensional areas, even though some areas were still pre-rendered. It is also the first in the series to feature voice acting. Set in the fantasy world of Spyra, you play as Titus, a star athlete in the fictional sport of blitzball, who finds himself in Spyra after Sin destroyed his home city of Zanarkand. Titus becomes a guardian to Summoner Yuna, on a quest to destroy Sin upon learning its true identity is that of his missing father, Jecht. Final Fantasy was both a critical and commercial success, and joins the list of Final Fantasy games considered to be one of the greatest video games of all time.
10 was the very first Final Fantasy I ever played. Got me really into the series, so let's see how they run. The launcher or setup tool may require touchscreen. It sounds like it should work perfectly fine. Then why? Oh, let's go back. Oh, no, what am I? Let's exit. Apparently it's standard in Japanese. Let's go again. No. I mean, I understand a bit of French, but I prefer English. Alright. Let's try this again. There we go. In English. Yes. This was the very first Final Fantasy game that had voice acting, if I'm not mistaken. Again, with the unskippable cutscenes.
Listen to my story.
I think I own like 4 versions of the game, both the original PlayStation 2 ones, and I also have it on the PS Vita, and I think on the PlayStation 3 maybe, or maybe the 4. It's big time nostalgia for me. I think this cutscene might be almost as iconic as the Final Fantasy VII cutscene. Or at least to me. That song goes fucking hard.
A gift from Jet.
My old man?
You can really tell the lip sync was done for Japanese and not for English. Alright. That's it. Let's take a look at XIII.
Final Fantasy X-2, the very first sequel to a Final Fantasy game, released for the PlayStation 2 in 2003. X-2 continues the story of Final Fantasy X, following Yuna looking for Tidus, the main character of the previous game, while trying to prevent political conflicts in Spyra from escalating to war. It was the first game in the series to feature just 3 player characters and an all-female main cast. The game was positively received by critics and was commercially successful, selling over 5.4 million copies on PlayStation 2 and winning a number of awards. It was the last Final Fantasy game to be released by Square before it merged with Enix in April 2003.
Also a somewhat iconic opening scene, but for different reasons. This really sets the tone for how silly this sequel is. The first Final Fantasy X started with the destruction of a city, and this one starts with a J-pop concert, so different tone. Still, there is charm in this game. Oh, this still cracks me up. Right, time for a dance-off.
Give it back already!
Boys? Want in on this number? Then show me your moves.
Think you can keep up? I could have danced all night.
Sorry! No time for an encore.
Also works perfectly.
Final Fantasy XI, also known as Final Fantasy XI Online, is a massive multiplayer online role-playing game. Originally developed and published by Squaresoft and then published by Square Enix as the 11th main installment of the Final Fantasy series for the PlayStation 2 and Windows. The story is set in the fantasy world of Vanadil, where player-created avatars can both compete and cooperate in a variety of objectives to develop an assortment of jobs, skills, and earn in-game item rewards. Since its debut in 2002, 5 expansion packs have been released along with 6 add-on scenarios. Each expansion pack and add-on brings a new major storyline to the Final Fantasy XI world, along with numerous areas, quests, events, and item rewards. In 2015, Square Enix released the final main scenario for Final Fantasy XI, titled Rhapsodies of Vanadil. Final Fantasy XI became the final active server on the PlayStation 2 online service until support ended on March 31, 2016, leaving only the PC platform playable.
Since I've never really been into MMOs, I actually don't own Final Fantasy XI. I think it's also the only numbered Final Fantasy game that I have never tried. So let's see. Typing is hard. Alright, so I tried to set up my account on my desktop computer. That play online shit is fucking ridiculously stupidly complicated. Didn't actually get the game running on my desktop, but I'm just gonna try it here. No option to turn off this music. What? There we go. progress. Let's see. Aw, don't forget your family, your friends, your school, or your work. What? What the fuck does this mean? Let's see what they say. Apparently I still had to purchase a character. Luckily it was free with the edition, but only for a month, so that's kind of bullshit. I don't think I will, after this, ever touch this game again, because this far it already has been a headache to get it running. This is... Oh god. This is ridiculous. Okay. That's better. This Muzak drum and bass is driving me insane. There you go, it says something now. Yes. Alright. This game better works now. I guess it's too late for another cup of coffee. I will have a glass of mead. The Final Fantasy XI is ridiculous. Dat is zo'n online Final Fantasy. Je moet hier 3000 hoek springen voordat je profiel ziet en dat is...
Ah, dat was het.
Ja. Ik denk dat ik er ga geraken, dat gelukje. What? Are you fucking shitting me? Well, this took more than 2 hours, but version update complete. Now let's see if it will run. Well, that's looking good.
Its many-colored light filled the world with life and brought forth mighty gods.
I am glad that after all that trouble, it at least seems to work. Hey, skippable. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, okay. Let's create a character. What the fuck is she doing? Looks a bit like Princess Mononoke. So yeah, I don't think I will spend much more time in this game. It feels a little bit too dated, and I'm really not into MMOs, even if it is Final Fantasy. But it works. It's a hassle to set up, but it works. Moving on to the last game of the PlayStation 2 era. And we get Final Fantasy XII.
Final Fantasy XII, developed and published by Square Enix, was first released for the PlayStation 2 in 2006. It introduced several innovations to the series. An open world, a seamless battle system, a controllable camera, a customizable gambit system, which lets the player control the artificial intelligence of characters in a battle, a license system, which determines what abilities and equipment can be used by characters, and hunting side quests, which allows the player to find and defeat increasingly difficult monsters in the game's open world. The game takes place in Ivalice, where the empires of Arcadia and Rosaria are waging an endless war. Dalmasca, a small kingdom, is caught between the warring nations. When Dalmasca is annexed by Arcadia, its princess, Ashe, creates a resistance movement. During the struggle, she meets Vaughn, a young adventurer who dreams of becoming a sky pirate in command of an airship. They are quickly joined by a band of allies. Together, they rally against the tyranny of the Arcadian Empire. Final Fantasy XII was both a critical and commercial success, earning several Game of the Year awards and selling over 6 million copies on the PlayStation 2 by November 2009.
It should run fine, it is verified. I remember the characters were a little bit less in this one, but it had an amazing story. Might be one of the first Final Fantasy games, except for 11 maybe, that stepped away from the turn-based combat. And the first as far as I know, single-player Final Fantasy game that showed enemies on the actual screen before you encountered them. So you could choose to avoid enemies, which is pretty great. I think I have a save game in here. Yeah, spent some hours on this already. It's been a long time since I played it though, so I have no idea what I was doing or where I need to go. I remember loving setting up gambits in this game when I first played it. On PS2, I could spend hours just setting up gambits and then letting my characters loose on a boss and not touch the controller. And just see how they demolished it. Seem to have conquered the board already. And a whole lot easier to set up than Final Fantasy XI, that's for sure. So yeah, works perfectly straight out of the box. No tinkering needed. Runs super smooth at 60 frames per second. And still looks pretty damn good. So there was a sequel slash spin-off to Final Fantasy XII called Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings.
The Final Fantasy XII spin-off Revenant Wings was developed by Think and Feel and Square Enix and released in 2007 for the Nintendo DS. The game is set 1 year after the events of Final Fantasy XII and follows the protagonist Vaan, who is now a sky pirate possessing his own airship. He is joined in a quest by his friend and navigator Penelo, and a host of both returning characters and new characters. Revenant Wings is a real-time strategy game, but with elements reminiscent of the turn-based Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Advance. It was the best-selling Japanese console game in the week of its release, then the second best-selling in the following week, and received generally favorable reviews.
Even though I have this on the DS and I have played some of it, this is also one of the games I never finished. So let's see if we can get it to work. Normally Nintendo DS emulation shouldn't be a problem. I'm just gonna use RetroArch for this. I'm using the Desmume core for DS emulation on RetroArch. Let's go. With the Desmume core, you can use R3 to switch between screens. I have also set this to R4 to make things a bit easier. Alright, let's fucking go. Nothing to it. Actually, it's easier to move the camera with the D-pad than with dragging it, but yeah. There's Penelo. Penelo, whatever. But yeah, works fine. Time to move into the PlayStation 3 era of Final Fantasy with Final Fantasy XIII.
Final Fantasy XIII, developed and published by Square Enix for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 consoles, released in Japan in 2009 and internationally in 2010. The game takes place in the fictional floating world of Cocoon, whose government, the Sanctum, is ordering a purge of civilians who have supposedly come into contact with Pulse, the much-feared world below. The former soldier Lightning begins her fight against the government in order to save her sister, who has been branded as an unwilling servant to a godlike being from Pulse. The game includes fast-paced combat, a new system for the series for determining which abilities are developed for the characters called Crystarium, and a customizable paradigm system to control which abilities are used by the characters. It is the first game to use Square Enix's Crystal Tools engine. Final Fantasy XIII was critically acclaimed in Japan and received mostly positive reviews from Western video game publications, which praised the game's graphics, presentation, and battle system. The game's linearity received a more mixed reception from some critics.
Let's see, game info. May require touchscreen. Final Fantasy XIII was always one of my least favorites. It's not a bad game and it has a somewhat interesting story and characters. I just really didn't like the linearity of it, especially after the very open world of 12. And I found the combat system a bit lacking, even though it's deeper than it seems at first. But it had amazing graphics at the time. Yeah, and a pretty interesting story from what I remember. New game, let's go. Fucking cat hairs everywhere. Yeah, those cutscenes still look really good. Really well animated. Yeah. Works fine out of the box. Oh yeah, I remember this shit. You can only quit this game out normally on the desktop with Alt F4. So in this case, it's good we have the exit game option. So Final Fantasy XIII was one of the few Final Fantasy games that got a direct sequel, also on PS3, aptly titled Final Fantasy XIII 2.
Final Fantasy XIII 2 was developed and published by Square Enix for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. It was released in 2011 in Japan and 2012 in North America and PAL regions. Lightning, the protagonist of the original game, has disappeared into an unknown world. Her younger sister, Sarah Farron, and No Christ journey through time in an attempt to find her. The plot's time travel elements allow the player to jump between different times at the same location or different places at the same time. Final Fantasy XIII 2 received critical acclaim in Japan and generally positive reviews from Western video game journalists. Though praised for its gameplay, lack of linearity and graphics, the game's story was criticized as weak and confusing.
Oh yeah, keyboard prompts are selected by default, with no way to change them to controller button prompts until after you completed the initial battle. So, let's see how that works out. Alright, let's see, full screen, yeah, that's fine. Shadow, let's put that lower, we don't need it that high. Start. Oh, you can actually set this to controller. I've played this game like halfway through but never finished it, I think. I played like 18 hours. Maybe that isn't even halfway through, maybe that's like a third. I remember this game being a bit more open than the previous one because it has like a time travel aspect where you can jump back and forth in different timelines, giving you a bit more freedom instead of the corridor hallways from the previous one. Can I skip this? Yeah, I just want to see if it works. Again, this game works perfectly almost out of the box, so I haven't run into a lot of games in general that don't really work on the Steam Deck. Most games that are not supported actually still work. So it's always interesting to just check ProtonDB, or just, you know, try for yourself and play around with some Proton settings. Oh, cinematic action. Cinematic action, just a different way of saying QuickTime event without saying QuickTime event. That being said, I don't hate QuickTime events, so when done well, it's done well. But yeah, fucking works. Moving on to the final game in the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. This is one I actually never even booted up before.
Lightning Returns Final Fantasy XIII, the conclusion to the story started in Final Fantasy XIII, released for the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 in 2013 in Japan and 2014 in North America and PAL regions. The game's story takes place 500 years after the previous game's ending. Lightning, the main protagonist of the first game and a key character in the second, awakes from a self-imposed hibernation 13 days before the world's end, and is chosen by the deity Vunivilze, or something like that, to save the people of the dying world. Lightning Returns employs a highly revamped version of the gameplay system from the previous two games, with an action-oriented battle system, the ability to customize the player's character's outfits, and a time limit the player must extend by completing story missions and side quests. It has received mixed reviews. While the main praise went to the game's battle system, opinions were more mixed for the graphics, time limit, and other aspects of gameplay, while the story and characters were criticized for being weak or poorly developed.
Let's see, playable sometimes shows mouse, keyboard, or non-Steam Deck controller icons. Let's have a look. I am actually quite surprised that up until here I managed to run every game, even if some have been more difficult than others, but that was not the Steam Deck fault. So seems to boot up alright. If I'm not mistaken, this is more of a hack and slash game than a turn-based game. Also believe it has some timed quests, that quest if you don't do them at a certain moment you can lose them forever. It has some things like that, which sounds interesting. Let's put this to controller type. Voice, yeah, let's leave it on Japanese. This is more or less a little bit more like Kingdom Hearts or like Final Fantasy 15, which I actually don't mind. This actually seems like a pretty interesting battle system. So maybe I should do a replay of this trilogy and, you know, this time stick it out till this third one. Yeah. This game actually, yeah, seems like fun. Should give it a try.
Final Fantasy XIV was a 2010 massive multiplayer online role-playing game for Microsoft Windows, developed and published by Square Enix. It was the second MMORPG in the series after Final Fantasy XI. Set in the fantasy realm of Eorzea, players took control of a customized avatar as they explored the land and were caught up in both an invasion by the hostile Garlean Empire and the threat of the Primals, the deities of the land's beastmen tribes. At launch, the game was met with a negative response. While the graphics and music were praised, other aspects were unanimously panned, including the gameplay, interface, and the general impression of the game being unfinished. Critic and fan backlash caused Square Enix to suspend subscription fees, indefinitely postpone the PlayStation 3 version, and replace the development team leadership with Naoki Yoshida as producer and director. His team was responsible for generating content for the original version as well as developing a brand new game which would address all the previous releases' criticisms. This new game, initially dubbed version 2.0, featured a new game engine, improved server infrastructure, and revamped gameplay, interface and story. The original version shut down in November 2012 and was followed by an alpha test for version 2.0. This new version, called A Realm Reborn, released in 2013 to largely positive reception for Windows and the PlayStation 3. Critics praised the game for its solid mechanics and progression, and they commended Yoshida for turning the project around.
Alright, the thing with Final Fantasy XIV is that it's another MMO. So I don't want to buy another game that I'm probably not going to play. But luckily, in the case of Final Fantasy XIV, it has a free trial version. From what I heard, this free trial is actually just like the complete base game that you can just play for free. Only if you ever upgrade towards the regular version, then you're stuck to the monthly plan. You can never go back to the free trial. So I'm never ever gonna upgrade to the regular version, and I'm just gonna install the demo. So I already downloaded the demo. It was like 150 megabyte package, so I'm pretty sure that once I start this up, probably will open up a launcher that will download more. As I said, needs to download a bit more. And by a bit, I mean 54 gigabytes. This might take a while. I fucking hate this shit. Alright, let's try this again. Jesus fucking Christ. Again. Can I press OK this time? Nope. Let's quit out of it again. I know these extra launchers probably come with the MMO territory, but Jesus fucking Christ. Alright. Guess I'm gonna do some dishes while this continues. Well, what do we have here? It's actually done. Alright, let's try this. Ah, yes. So, actually got in. Oh yeah, I already made a character once. I don't remember doing this. Okay. Well, I don't know what I'm doing. But the good news is, this game works. Let's map. These like touch. Yeah, I guess I can touch those. These things are so hard to jump in for new players sometimes. It's a little bit overwhelming. No. So, both this one and 11, I've been shitting on them for being MMOs. But I am curious about them. And I will probably play them on the desktop, see if I can figure it out with some guys, because they're probably pretty decent, even though I hate the installers. So don't hate on me for shit talking them, okay? But the great thing is, It kind of works out of the box also, this one. So we have arrived at Final Fantasy 15, the final game to test.
Final Fantasy XV, developed and published by Square Enix, released for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in 2016 and for Windows in 2018. Final Fantasy XV takes place on the fictional world of Eos, where all the world is dominated by the Empire of Niflheim, who seek control of the magical crystal protected by the Lucian royal family. On the eve of peace negotiations, Niflheim attacks the capital and steals the crystal. Noctis Lucis Callum, heir to the Lucian throne, goes on a quest to rescue the crystal and defeat Niflheim. The game's development began in 2006 as a PlayStation 3 spin-off titled Final Fantasy Versus 13. After a development period of 6 years, it was changed to the next mainline title in the series in 2012. Final Fantasy XV was well received by critics. Widespread praise was given for its gameplay, visuals and soundtrack, while reception towards its story and presentation was mixed. As of May 2022, the game has sold 10 million units worldwide, making it one of the best-selling Final Fantasy games of all time.
Even though this game had its problematic developments and it had some really weird jumps in the story from what I remember, I actually really liked this game. I thought the combat and gameplay was really great. The camaraderie between the characters was also really well done. Just the camping, the little food animations were all very charming. It is completely verified, so it should just run fine. I want to see if we can actually run it at 60. Yeah, 60 was overly optimistic, obviously, and this is not even in the open world. It's probably better to just lock it at 30. That's limited here till 32. Let's turn motion blur off. I'm starting to think I should do a complete Final Fantasy playthrough. Start with 1 and work my way up to 15 again, but that will take so much time. I'll start with the ones I haven't finished yet. Seems to have a solid 30 FPS frame rate.
Whoa, that sounds way cool. I'm actually looking
In the open world. Not many effects going on though. I used to play this so much, my girlfriend was going crazy from all these songs. Were just driving her insane. Ah yes, the long drives in this game. I do remember those. This, yeah, really runs fine. Looks good on the Steam Deck screen. Just want to check out some combat.
I want to let my chocolate Can't get it out of my head.
Just use my ring. Boom, you're done. Oh yeah. There you have it. Every single numbered Final Fantasy game actually runs on the Steam Deck. And all of them run pretty well, even though the online ones, the multiplayer ones, are quite annoying to set up, especially 11. But I think that's the same problem on PC as on Steam Deck. So I would say officially that the PS Vita has been replaced for me as the Final Fantasy handheld. Still love you, baby. Don't worry. But yeah, this is better than I expected.